Frank's story, when respect became a battlefield. Picture this. You've spent 35 years defending your country. You've saved lives, held the line when everything fell apart, and earned every bit of respect that comes with the uniform. Now imagine being treated like a criminal on a railway platform just for asking a simple question. That's exactly what happened to Frank Durgan. And trust me, you need to hear this story. Frank's standing there on platform 7 at Union Station, 72 years old, dressed in his worn service cap and jacket, covered in ribbons that tell stories most of us could uneven imagine. He's got this small duffel bag in his weathered hands, the same bag that's traveled with him to more countries than most people will ever see. Morning light catches those faded medals on his chest, and there's something about the way he carries himself. Steady comes like a man who's learned that panic never solved a bloody thing. Around him, the station's chaos. Commuters rushing everywhere. People glued to their phones. The usual madness of a weekday morning. But Frank's different. Those sharp blue eyes of his, they're taking everything in. The way people move, the sounds they make, all those tiny details everyone else misses. Decades of military training will do that to you. It never really leaves. Does it? He's here for the same reason he comes every single month. Visiting his grandson Tommy at the military academy upstate. Same journey, same platform, same 9:15 train. He's caught religiously for 3 years straight. But something feels off today. Can you sense it? That subtle shift in the air when you know something's about to go terribly wrong. Now, let me take you back a bit. Frank wasn't always this gray-haired veteran standing on a platform. At 80, he was just a scared kid from Ohio who signed up for the army. 35 years later, he retired as a full colonel. Vietnam, Bosnia, 2 tours in Iraq. Not because he loved war, mind you, but because he genuinely believed in protecting the people back home who couldn't protect themselves. There's this moment in 1994 that defined everything Frank stood for. During a peacekeeping mission in Bosnia, his unit discovered something heartbreaking. A bombed-out school with 12 families trapped inside. Children as young as 3 years old. Absolutely terrified. Frank made the call right there. He stayed behind with a small team while the rest of his unit pushed forward. 18 hours they held that position. 18 hours under constant threat, never knowing if the next moment would be their last. But every single civilian walked out alive. Every single one. Frank never banged on about his medals or commendations. That wasn't his style. For him, it was straightforward. You do what's right. You protect those who can't protect themselves, and you never, ever leave anyone behind. These weren't just military principles. This was how a decent human being lived their life. Full stop. His wife Martha passed 3 years ago, and since then, these monthly visits to Tommy became everything to him. That young lad reminds Frank so much of himself at that age, full of questions about duty, honor, what it really means to serve your country. It's beautiful, really. So there's Frank at the ticket counter, expecting the usual routine. But the young woman behind the glass barely glances up from her computer screen. She tells him his usual seat's been changed. No explanation. No apology. Just a blunt instruction to move to a different carriage. Frank's polite about it. He asks why. Explains he's been taking this exact train every month for 3 years. Reasonable question, right? That's when things get properly weird. The woman's supervisor appears, thin bloke with nervous eyes, and he starts talking to Frank like he's a child who can't understand basic instructions. They tell him there's been a security concern. Certain passengers need relocating for everyone's safety. When Frank asks, what kind of security concern, the supervisor's voice gets louder. Suddenly, people are turning to stare. The supervisor calls over a transit police officer, fresh-faced kid who looks like he graduated from the academy about 5 minutes ago. Can you imagine? Here's Frank, trying to show his military ID. Trying to explain he's a decorated veteran, just wanting to visit his grandson. But this young officer doesn't see that. He sees an elderly man who won't follow simple instructions, and within minutes, backup arrives. 2 more officers treating Frank like he's some kind of threat. Then it happens. One officer grabs Frank's arm roughly, trying to force him to move. Frank, operating on decades of training, instinctively pulls away. That split-second reaction seals his fate. They decide he's resisting. He needs subduing. The taser comes out, and suddenly Frank Durgan, a man who served his country for 35 years, is on the ground convulsing whilst dozens of strangers stand around recording with their phones. Let that sink in for a moment. A decorated colonel on the cold concrete of a railway platform, electrical current tearing through his muscles. But here's what gets me. As Frank lies there, his mind doesn't go to anger or pain. He's thinking about that school in Bosnia, the faces of those children he helped save, the promise he made to himself that he'd always stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. The physical pain fades, but something deeper cuts through him. This isn't about a train seat or some misunderstanding. This is about respect, or the complete absence of it. Frank's seen how other countries treat their veterans. Places where military service actually means something, where gray-haired soldiers are honored instead of being tased like criminals. He thinks about Martha, how she used to worry that people were forgetting what soldiers like Frank had sacrificed. She'd say America was losing its way, that people didn't understand the price of freedom anymore. Frank always told her not to worry. Things would work out. Lying on that platform, he wonders if Martha was right all along. But the worst part, thinking about Tommy. What would his grandson think if he saw this? What would it do to that young man's faith in the system he's training to serve? The incident spreads like wildfire. Someone's phone video goes viral within hours. Elderly veteran being tased for asking why his train seat was changed. The footage is grainy but clear enough. Frank in his army cap, trying to reason with officers, then writhing on the ground as people gasp and scream. Frank ends up in hospital, more confused than hurt, really. Then comes the parade. Reporters wanting statements. Lawyers offering representation. Activists trying to use his story for their own agendas. Everyone wants a piece of Frank Durgan now, but nobody seemed to care about him 6 hours earlier when he was just another old man on a train platform. Funny how that works, isn't it? The transit authority releases their statement. Officers followed proper procedures. Frank was agitated and non-compliant. Force was necessary for everyone's safety. They mentioned nothing about his military service. Nothing about the fact he was simply trying to visit his grandson. Classic bureaucratic response. Frank's phone won't stop ringing. Neighbors, people from church, old army mates checking in. The attention makes him uncomfortable. He never wanted to be famous, especially not like this. All he wanted was to catch a bloody train. Tommy arrives that evening, drove down from the academy the moment he heard. The look in his grandson's eyes cuts deeper than any taser ever could. Anger, sadness, and something else. Disappointment. Not in Frank, but in the country they both chose to serve. 3 days later, Frank is sitting in his kitchen, trying to make sense of everything when 3 black SUVs pull up outside. Unmarked, but official-looking. The kind government people use when they want to be noticed, but not identified. 6 men in dark suits approach his front door. They're not local police or FBI. These men carry themselves differently, with the bearing that comes from serious military training. The lead man, silver at his temples, introduces himself as Colonel Mitchell. He works for a special Pentagon unit investigating incidents involving veterans. He's been reviewing Frank's case, not because of the media attention, but because of what they discovered when they dug into why Frank's seat assignment was changed. Now, this is where it gets absolutely mental. The security concern wasn't random. Someone had flagged Frank's name in the system, marked him as a potential threat because of his service record in Bosnia, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he'd done something right. Those civilians Frank saved in 1994, one family's son grew up to become a key witness in a war crimes trial. Some very powerful people wanted that testimony silenced, and they've been tracking anyone connected to that rescue operation for years. Mitchell tells Frank the transit incident was meant to discredit him, make him look unstable in case he ever needed to testify about what he witnessed in Bosnia. The plan was working perfectly until that video went viral and attracted the wrong kind of attention. But here's the brilliant bit. Mitchell's unit had been watching the people who were watching Frank. They had evidence of the entire conspiracy. Recordings of phone calls, financial records showing payments to transit officials. The whole ugly truth was about to come out. Week in a week, everything shifts. The transit authority suddenly discovers procedural errors in how Frank was treated. Officers involved face suspension and retraining. The supervisor who started the whole mess quietly resigns, citing personal reasons. But the real victory. Mitchell's investigation goes public. The war crimes trial that Frank's testimony could support moves forward with new evidence. The people who tried to silence him face justice themselves. The witness Frank helped save 28 years ago finally gets to tell his story in court. Frank doesn't seek revenge against the officers who tased him. He understands they were just following orders, doing what they thought was right with incomplete information. Instead, he speaks at their retraining sessions, helping them understand how to better interact with veterans and elderly citizens. That's the kind of man he is. The transit authority offers Frank free lifetime passes on any train in their system. He politely declines, says he just wants to be treated like any other paying customer. What he does accept, that invitation to help develop new training programs for their staff. Tommy visits more often now, not out of pity, but because he's genuinely proud of how his grandfather handled everything. The young man's learned something valuable about real strength. It's not about fighting back when you're wronged. It's about making sure the same wrong doesn't happen to someone else. Frank still takes that same train to visit Tommy every month, sits in whatever seat they assign him without complaint. But now the staff knows who he is. Not because he's famous, but because he's Frank, a man who served his country and continues serving it in smaller, quieter ways. Here's what Frank learned through all this. The truth has weight to it. Doesn't matter if that truth takes 28 years to surface, or comes wrapped in a humiliating incident on a railway platform. What matters is when truth finally arrives, good people recognize it and act on it. Respect isn't something you can demand or fight for. It's something you earn through how you handle yourself when everything goes wrong. The real measure of a person, it's not what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when they think nobody cares. Every veteran carries stories most people will never hear. Stories of sacrifice, impossible choices, holding the line when everything falls apart. Frank's story got told because of a viral video, but there are thousands of others, just like him, living quietly, asking for nothing more than the basic dignity they earned through their service. Sometimes the most powerful victory is simply being seen for who you really are, a human being, with a lifetime of service behind them, deserving of the most basic respect we can offer. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people around you who've served, do me a favor, share it. Talk about it. Make sure we never forget what people like Frank have given us, because the moment we stop caring is the moment we lose everything they fought to protect.